Begin the Gemara today, 6 lines from the bottom of the Amud and Daf Yutes Amud Beis. Zok the Gemara, Boy minei Abaye mirabba. Abaye asked Rabba the following question. Kavrei beregel. If a person buries a relative on Yom Tif, he has to sit shiva for him, and he has to also keep the days of Shloshim. So the question is, regarding shiva, we already said before, that a Yom Tif pushes off shiva. And if the burial happened on Yom Tif itself, then what happens is you begin the shiva after Yom Tif. But the question is, regel oilol olaminyan shloshim, do you count the days of Yom Tif for part of the days of the shloshim? Oy ein regel oilol olaminyan shloshim. Or the days of Yom Tif do not count as part of the shloshim, and you have to start shloshim after Yom Tif. So the Gemara explains the question. Laminyan shiva, so Abaye says, as far as the days of shiva, loy kami bayali, so I don't have a question about this. The loynog and mitzvah shiva beregel, because the halachas of shiva do not apply in a Yom Tif. So for example, Rashi says the fact that on shiva you don't wear shoes, that's not something that there's a halacha that you apply that applies in Yom Tif. On Yom Tif you do wear shoes. So since you didn't begin your shiva yet on Yom Tif, so you start the shiva after Yom Tif. Kikami bayali, the question however is, Laminyan shloshim, regarding counting the days of shloshim, the konoaga mitzvah shloshim beregel. The halachas of shloshim, you anyways end up fulfilling them on a Yom Tif. As Rashi brings over here, Lamalsha, you're not allowed to wash your clothing, or Rashi uses the example of ironing your clothing, or you're not allowed to take a haircut. So you begin that already on Yom Tif and Chol Hamoed, where you're not taking a haircut and you're not washing your clothing. So maybe we can count the days of the Yom Tif or Chol Hamoed as part of the shloshim. So here's the question, is it count or does it not count? Amalei, so Rabba answered him, Eino Eila. No, the days of Yom Tif do not count as part of the shloshim. You begin counting the shloshim after Yom Tif. Eisvei, so they asked on this psak din from the following brayse. It says, a person buries 2 days before Yom Tif. So the Tana of this brayse holds, like it said in our Mishnah, that when do you say that the Yom Tif interrupts the shiva? If you had 3 days of shiva before Yom Tif. So here there were only 2 days of shiva before Yom Tif. So then so then you have to continue another 5 days of shiva after Yom Tif. And in those 5 days, other people can come and do work for you. So there are some that say that when it says in Malachta Nasas Acherim, even though usually by shiva someone else is not supposed to keep your store open or do work for you, but over here, because this is a pushed off shiva, so it's allowed. But Taisus over here says that when it says Malachta Nasas Acherim, it doesn't mean that there's more of a heter here. But in the last words of Taisus, he says, here we're speaking about a davara of it. When it's something where there's a financial loss, then every time by shiva, someone else could take care of your work for you in such a situation. And then it says in the Brayse of Avada v'shiv chaysav, your maids and your servants, oisim b'tzin b'tech beisa, they can do work for you quietly in your house. Another detail here regarding this case, when there's a pushed off shiva to after Yom Tif, v'ein rabim is askim imay. And all the people that usually come to be Menachem Avol don't have to come to be Menachem Avol for those 5 days after Yom Tif. Why? Shekvar is asku boy beregel, because they had a time to be Menachem Avol and to come speak to you during Yom Tif. And the Brayse explains, Klal Shel Davar, the rule over here is as follows: Kol shu mishum evel, any of the halachas that applies to the Avol himself, Lamashal not wearing shoes, and all the other halachas regarding the Avol himself. So regel mafsikai. So on Yom Tif you stop and you don't do that. So if he had 2 days of avelis before Yom Tif, and then he's continuing his shiva after Yom Tif, he has to continue following those halachas after Yom Tif, because he couldn't do them on Yom Tif. V'chol shehu mishum iskei rabim, but all those things which includes in shiva, which is the other people that are coming to be menachem avol, ein regel mafsikai. That's something that the Yom Tif does not stop that. Anybody can come during Yom Tif to be menachem avol the person. So therefore, even though he himself has to keep 5 days of avelis after Yom Tif, but the nichem avelim does not continue after Yom Tif. What happens if he buries in 3 days before the end of the Yom Tif? It's just an example, but the same would be any other day during Yom Tif. But the Brayse is giving an example that he buried 3 days of Yom Tif were left, the Sefer Regel. So then, Moina Shiva Acha Regel. So you begin your Shiva after Yom Tif. And the Brayse explains, Arba Yomim Marishainim, 4 days of that Shiva, Rabbim is asking by. All people come to him, and people are Menachem Avolim for those 4 days, because those 4 days they did not have to be Menachem Avol during Yom Tif. Shloisha Yamim Achrayim, the last 3 days of the Shiva, he has to keep those days of Shiva, which he did not keep during Yontif, but Ein Rabim Misaskim Bay. But people do not have to come to be Menachem Avol, Shekvar Nisasku Beregel, because the 3 days of Yontif that he was sitting Shiva already, or not, he wasn't keeping Shiva, but people were able to come to be Menachem Avolim during the 3 days of Yontif, so people are not going to come to be Menachem Avolim. So till here, the Braisa was speaking about the halachas of Shiva, whether the Shiva began 2 days before Yom Tif or during Yom Tif. Then the Braisa concludes, V'regel oilaloi. And the Yom Tif is also counted. The days of Yom Tif are counted. What is the Braisa talking about? Here the Braisa is talking about Shloshim, that the days of the Yom Tif are counted for the Shloshim. So the Gemara says, this seems to refute what Rabbi said. My love, don't you think, Kaseifa, when it says here that the days of the Yom Tif will count for the Shloshim, it's referring to the case of the Sefer, where the person, the relative passed away on Yom Tif itself, and he begins counting Shloshim on Yom Tif itself, and the Braisa says that the days of the Yom Tif count for the Shloshim. So that's a question on Rabbah that said that the days of Yom Tif do not count for the Shloshim. So the Gemara answers, Loi, Areisha. This is going back to the Reisha. In the Reisha of the Braisa, where it spoke about that the person already began counting Shiva 2 days before Yom Tif. So when you count the Shloshim, you count the Shloshim from the day of the burial, so therefore you already are starting to count Shloshim from before Yom Tif. So over there, since you already started your Avelis from before Yom Tif, on that the Braisa is saying that the Yom Tif will count for the Shloshim. But in the Sefer, when he began the Shiva in Yom Tif itself, over there the Rabbah could still be right that the days of the Yom Tif do not count for the Shloshim. So there's no question on Rabbah from here. But now the Gemara brings another Braisa where it says clearly not like Rabbah. Eisvei, so they asked him, it says in the Braisa clearly Regel Oile Loile Minyan Shloshim, that the days of the Yom Tif are counted for the days of Shloshim. Keitzad, what does this mean? Kavrei betchilas haregel, if the burial was in the beginning of the Yom Tif, so moine Shiva achar regel. You begin keeping Shiva after Yom Tif. And then others could do work for you. And your servants and maids could do housework for you, or could do work for you discreetly in the house. And ve'ein rabim is asking boy, and people do not have to come to be menachem avolim shekvarnas asking boy beregel, because they had the time to be menachem avol during the 7 days of Yom Tif. And then the Braisa concludes again, veregel oiluloi, and the days of the Yom Tif are going to be counted for him. What are they counted for? It's counted for the days of Shloshim, like it said Fedish in the beginning of the Braisa, regel oiluloi lemin Shloshim. So here we clearly see that even though he began the Avelos in Yom Tif, but the days of the Yom Tif are counted for the Shloshim. To Yofte. So this refutes what Rabbah said. The Gemara brings other Amiroim that said the same thing.
Where did we have that you bought a berry on Yom Tif? Came berry on Shabbos.
Correct.
Came berry on
Yom Tif, and Yom Tif Sheni. Yeah, we had this as a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. When you get to using a goy, yeah. Dr. Gemara, Ki Asa Ravin. So Ravin came, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, and he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the same halacha, not like Rabbah, like it says in this Braisa. Afila kavrei beregel, even if the kvura was on Yom Tif itself, so the days of Shloshim, you count, including Yom Tif. V'chein oiri le Rabbi Elazar le Rabbi Pedas berei, Rabbi Elazar taught Rabbi Pedas' son, Afila kavrei beregel, that even the kvura on Yom Tif, you count it as part of the Shloshim. That's what it says here in this Gemara. I'm not sure. We'll see in the continuation. Maybe there's a sugi later that says differently. But according to what it says here, Nichem Avelim is even on Yontif. Yeah. So this is not going back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that if you have 3 days of Shiva before Yontif, then the Yontif cuts off the Avelos. So here the Gemara brings a Braisa where there's a machlokes about this. So the Tanakama says, like it said in our Mishnah, that if you already turned over your bed 3 days before Yom Tif, so that's the Avelis 3 days, Koydem HaRegel, so then Ein Tzarech L'chvoisa Acha HaRegel. So then after Yom Tif, you don't continue keeping Shiva. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim Ma'imrim, the Chachamim say, Afilu Yom Echad V'afilu Shah Echas. Even if you kept the Avelis of Shiva for 1 day or even 1 hour before Yom Tif, the Yom Tif cuts it off, and you don't continue keeping Shiva after Yom Tif. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rab Shimon, Hein Divrei Beis Shammai, and Hein Divrei Beis Hillel. This machlokes here between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Rabbi Eliezer was one of the students of Beis Shammai, The Gemara says there's a famous Gemara in Bab Metzir that talks about Rabbi Eliezer, and there it says Rabbi Eliezer was the student of Beishamai, and the Chachamim are Beis Hillel. Beishamai's opinion was Shloisha Yomim. Only if there were 3 days of Shiva, then Yontif cuts it off. Or Beis Hillel Oimrim, but Beis Hillel say Afilu Yom Echad, even 1 day, or even more than that, even 1 hour. Afilu Sha'achas, some Agayris here, like we said before. Omer Rav Huna, Omer Rav Chiya bar Abba, Omer Rav Yechanan. It's in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. V'amri la, others say, Amalahu Rabbi Yechanan, that Rabbi Yechanan said this, L'Rab Chiya bar Abba or L'Rav Huna. He said to both of them, that we paskin like this halacha, like Beis Hillel, that afilu yom echad, afilu shah achas. Even 1 hour before Yontif, you keep Shiva, the Yontif cuts off the Avelis. Rava said, no, halacha ketana didan. We paskin like the Tana of our Mishnah, the Amar Shloisha, that said only if there's 3 days of Avelis, then the Yontif cuts it off. Ravuna ikla l'Sura de Piros. Ravuna was in the city of Sura, which is by the river Piros. Amalei Rav Chaviva le Ravina. So Rav Chaviva asked Ravina the question, Hilchasamai, what's the halacha regarding this when you start Shiva before Yom Tov? Amalei, so he answered him, Afilu Yom Echad and Afilu Shah Achas, even 1 day or 1 hour of Shiva before Yom Tov, it cuts off the entire Shiva. And that's the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. So the Gemara, Yosef, Rab Chiya, Bar Abba, Rab Ami, Rab Yitzchak Nafche. So these 3 Amiroim were sitting, Akila de Rab Yitzchak ben Elazar, outside of the house by Rab Yitzchak ben Elazar. So Nafik Milsim mi Beinayu, so they heard the halacha that was taught inside of it there, and it came out, and the halacha was regarding Avelis Bechlal. Minayin la Avelis Shiva. From where do we know? What's the source that Avelis is 7 days? Answer is, the Chsiv, there's a pasuk that says, Va'afachti chagechem level. I will transform your celebration of Yontif into an Avelis. Ma chag Shiva, just like a Yontif is 7 days. Af Avelos Shiva. So too, the Avelis is 7 days. Fragt the Gemara, how do we know to compare to a Yontif like Pesach that's 7 days? Ve'ema Atzeres. Maybe compare to Shavuos, the Chad Yom, which is only 1 day. So the Gemara answers, you're right, sometimes we do say it's 1 day. Ahumi bayele leked Reish Lakish. This, to compare it to Shavuos, that it's 1 day, that's like Reish Lakish said. Amar Reish Lakish, Mishum Rab Yudah Nesiyah, he said in the name of Rab Yudah Nesiyah, Minayin l'shmur chayka she'ein neheges el yom echad. What happens if you didn't find out about a relative that passed away immediately when it happened, but you found out about it much later? And the Gemara will soon explain what much later means. So then the Avelis is only 1 day. So from where do we know that then it's only 1 day? That I will transform your Yontif into Avelos. So there we have 1 day. Atzeres is called a Yontif 1 day. So usually Avelos is compared to the Yontif of 7 days. But a Shmuar Chayka, then we compare it to Shavuos, and the Avelis is only 1 day. So here the Gemara brings the source of this halacha. Tan Rabbanon, Shmuar Kroive, Nehege Shiva. When you hear about it right away, so then the Avelis is 7 days. And a Shloishim, and you have Shiva and also Shloishim. Shmuar Chayke, and in Nehege Yom Echad. But if it's a Shmuar Chayka, if you heard it, then it's from a distant. If it happened a long time ago, then it's only 1 day. What's considered to be immediately and what's considered to be later on? If you hear about this within Shloishim, then you have to keep Shiva and Shloishim. Rechaika is if you heard about this after Shloishim, then you don't have to keep Shiva more than just 1 day. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's how Rabbi Akiva explains this. The Chachamim argue and say, does it make a difference? Whether you hear about it right away, whether you hear about it later on. You always have to keep the 7 days of Shiva and Shloishim. So he said, who do we paskin like? Rabbi Akiva or the Chachamim? Whenever you find a machlokes and there's one Tana that is lenient, and then you have the Chachamim, you have the Rabbim that are stringent. So usually, halachic Rabbim, we paskin like the Rabbim that are more stringent. Chutz mizu, besides over here, in this case, we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. Sha'afu pisha Rabbi Akiva mekel v'chachamim machmirim. Even though Rabbi Akiva is lenient and the Chachamim are more stringent. Halachic Rabbi Akiva, here we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. And again, the Gemara brings the Alma Shmuel, halachic kedivrei hamekel bavel. When by Avelis, we always paskin like the opinion that's more lenient. So the Gemara brings now different incidents that happened. Rav Chanina asya leishmur davua. Rav Chanina asya leishmur davua mi beichuzoi. He had a shmua about his father passing away from beichuzoi, which came late. It came after Shloishim. So he wasn't sure how to paskin. Asala kamed Rav Chisda came and asked Rav Chisda. Amalei Rav Chisda told him, Shmuar Chayka, you found out about this late, and Ein Ne'agas Ela Yom Echad. So the shiva is only one day. Rav Nasan Barami asala le Shmuar the imam mi Beichazoi. Rav Nasan Barami, so the Shmuar about his mother passing away, also came from Beichazoi after Shloshim. Asala kamed Rava. Came to Rava Amalei Harayamru Shmura Chayka and Agas Aliyamechad Bulvat. So he also said that a Shmura Chayka is only one day. So Eisvei, so Rav Nasan Barami asked Rava, it says Nabraise Bamed Dvarim Amurim B'Chamisha Meise Mitzvah. When do you say that if you find out about it later, that's only regarding 5 of the relatives of the Meise Mitzvah? So Rashi over here brings what these 5 relatives are. It's B'noi, Bitoi, Achav, Achayse, Ve'eshtoi. Those 5 relatives are, so if there's a shmur chayka, you keep one day. Aval al aviv al imoy, but regarding a father or a mother, shiva shloishim, so then you do keep shiva and shloishim, even if it's something that you found out later. So he's asking Rava, why are you telling me that I could keep one day if he was talking about his mother that passed away? Amalei, so Rava answered him, Yechidahi, this braisi you just quoted is the opinion of one single Tana, we don't hold like that braisa. And he brings on the source of who this Tana was that held like this. The Tanya we learned in another Braise, Maise umeis aviv shel Rab Tzadik beginzik. The father of Rab Tzadik in Ginzik passed away. Vaydiyu la'acha shalish shanim. They only let him know about this 3 years later. Uba v'shalas Elisha ben Avuya, he came to ask Elisha ben Avuya v'zekeinim she'imai regarding if he should keep Shiva or not. Va'amru, and they told him, Nahoig Shiva shloishim, that yes, you do have to keep Shiva and shloishim even though he found that so much later. Similar, the story happened when Rabbi Chia, his brother, passed away in Galos. Yashav Alav Shiva Shloishim. He also kept Shiva and Shloishim. So here you see, this is the Braisa which held this way, that regarding a father and a mother, you keep Shiva and Shloishim. Over here it even actually talks about the son of Rabbi Chia. But we don't pass like this. The Rebbe brings this Gemara in a Ha'ara somewhere, and the Rebbe says that from this Gemara you see this last case of it, that they only let him know 3 years later, that there is an inyan, you don't have to necessarily let someone know that a relative passed away. If you want to withhold the information and notify much later, so he doesn't have to keep Shiva Shloishim, there's an inyan in it, that he shouldn't have to have the tsar, and he should be able to, don't have to keep the whole Shiva and Shloishim. Like you see here, V'hoidiyu, they waited to let him know.
Maybe there was no other way. Maybe they couldn't until it.
Could be. Okay, I'm telling you what the Rebbe says. That you see, the Rebbe brings sources for this. That you see that information of a tragedy and so on. So
didn't the Rebbe do that with his mother?
The Rebbe by his mother didn't let her know b'chlal. The Rebbe played the whole time as if not to be mitzayer at all. Yeah, that's very unusual. Yeah, frag the Gemara. So here, the last point it said was that Rabbi Chia sat Shiva and Shloishim even for Shmur Chayka. Now, at this point, the Gemara thinks, who's this Rabbi Chia? Rabbi Chia is Rab Chia. It's the same person, even though there's an aleph in front of his name, but the Gemara understands that this is Rab Chia. In fact, the Gemara, is this true? But for Rav, which was Bar Achur, the Rabbi Chia, he was the son of the brother of Rab Chia, and he was the Hu Bar Achse the Rab Chia, and he was also the son of the sister of Rab Chia. So this was a brother and a sister that did not share the same parents, but they were a brother of Rab Chia through the father, and a sister to Rab Chia through the mother. So they both got married to each other, and they were the father and mother of Rav. So Rav's father and mother, he was Rab Chia's nephew twice. He was Rab Chia's nephew through his father and through his mother. They were both a brother and sister to Rab Chia from a different father and mother. So what happened? Ki salik lahasam. When Rav came to Eretz Yisrael, Amalei, so Rav asked Rab Chia, asked Rav, Abba Kayam, is my father still alive? So he didn't want to answer him clearly that his father passed away. Amalei, he told Rab Chia, Ima Kayamis. Why are you asking me about whether your father is alive? You should ask me whether your mother is alive first. Amalei, so Rab Chia asks him, Ima Kayamis, is my mother alive? Amalei, Abba Kayim, you asked me about your mother, but did I answer you yet regarding your father, whether your father is alive? In other words, he didn't want to tell him clearly. From here you see in the Gemara, this is brought actually in the Gemara in Psachim, where it speaks about the fact that a person should try as much as possible not to say a dova maguna, not to speak negatively. And over here as well, he didn't want to clearly tell him about the fact that his father and mother passed away. So he hinted at him in this way. Okay, so he understood what happened, that his mother and father both passed away, and he understood that it happened a while ago. So he told his servant, take off my shoes. In other words, he has to keep avelos. And then right afterwards he told him, come, take with me my garments, and we're going to the bathhouse to bathe. Meaning that he only kept avelos for a short period of time. So the Gemara says regarding this story here, Shma Minot Klas. You learn from the story 3 halachas. Shma Minot, from here you learn Aval Asa Benilas Asandal, that an Aval is not supposed to wear shoes. Shma Minot, second halacha you learn is Shmur Rechoika Ein Neheges Ela Yemecha. When you find out about a relative that passed away from a long time ago, so the avelos is one day. On Shma Minot, the third halacha you learn over here is Miktas Hayom Kekuloi, and that even that one day, it's not a full day. He just kept avelos for one moment, and then he right away is going to the bathhouse. So what's the Gemara's question now? Here we see that Chia holds that when you find out a Shmur Rechoika, you keep avelos for one day, or even just for a moment of the day. And before we said that Rabbi Chia kept avelos even for his sons, Shiva and Shloishim. So the Gemara answers it's not the same person. Rab Chia Luchod and Rab Achia Luchod. Rab Chia is one person and Rab Achia is another person. So the Gemara, Rab Yesi Baravin, Shama Shmur Kroiva Beregel. What happens if a person finds out that what? It's two different people, so there's a machlokes between them. The machlokes. So Rabbi Yosef Baravin said, Shama Shmua Kroiva Beregel. If you find out about a relative that passed away, and on Yontif you found out about it, and it's still a Shmua Kroiva. By then it's still within 30 days. But Ula Matzah Regel, it comes the Matzah the Yontif, Nasas Rechoikas, and now it's after 30 days already. So in such a case, the fact that by the time you could keep Shiva, it's already after Yontif, and it's not at this point, it's after 30 days, so that counts. And therefore, you only keep Shiva one day. Tana Rab Abed, the Min Kisri, Kamed Rab Yechanan. So he learned the halach in front of Rab Yechanan. Shama Shmua Kroiva b'Shabbos. A similar thing. You heard on Shabbos about what happened. And on Shabbos, it's still within 30 days. And then Olam Matzah Shabbos, Nasas Rechoika. Matzah Shabbos, it's already the 30th day, and now it's already Shmua Rechoika. And in Noyeg Ela Yom Echad. So the same thing over here is that you only Noyeg Shiva one day. Another shayla the Gemara asks, Keireya or Eine Keireya? If you find out the Shmuach Rechoika and you're not keeping the Shiva, the full Shiva, just one day, so what's the halacha with Kriya? Do you have to tear your garments or do you not have to tear your garments? Rab Mani said, Eine Keireya. He does not do Kriya. Rab Chanina ma Keireya. Rab Chanina says, even when you don't keep Shiva, but still the halacha of Kriya does apply. Amalei Rabbi Rab Mani Rab Chanina. So Rab Mani asked Rab Chanina, according to my opinion, it's understood that I said that you don't do any kriya. And the reason is because if there's no avelus shiva, there's no kriya either. It goes together. But according to your opinion, the amrit kriya, that you do kriya even if it's a shmur rechoika and you're not keeping 7 days shiva. Kriya beloy shiva mi. Is there a halacha of kriya in a situation where a person is not keeping shiva? That was his question. So the Gemara says, Veloy, and there isn't, but v'hatanya, we learned in Abraise, the Isi Avur de Rab Zera. Isi, which was the father of Rab Zera. V'amri la achur de Rab Zera. Others say that Isi was the brother of Rab Zera. So he learned Abraise, Kamei de Rab Zera. In front of Rab Zera, he learned as follows. Mi she'en lechaluk lekroya. In a situation where a person has to do kriya, but he doesn't have a garment of his own to do the kriya. The clothing he's wearing is borrowed clothing, so he can't do the kriya. And he has these garments he's wearing b'toich shiva when he has to do the kriya. So what does he do? He can't do the kriya then. So kriya. So again, b'toich shiva kriya. So he said within shiva. So then he does the kriya. La'acha shiva, but after shiva, eina kriya. After shiva, if he only has garments that he can do kriya on, after shiva, he does not do kriya. Okay, so over here, in the beginning of the Braise, it seems to say clearly, like Rab Mani said, that you don't do kriya after shiva. But then the Gemara continues. What was the hemshech of the Braise? Ani Rab Zera Basrei. Rab Zera, when he heard his father or his brother saying this part of the Braise, he continued the Braise and he said, this that you said, that if you can't do kriya within shiva, you don't do kriya after shiva, is only regarding the 5 different relatives that there are. But regarding a father and a mother, then a person does kriya even later, even after the shiva. So therefore, the Gemara is saying, here you see that there is kriya even after shiva. So what was Rab Mani's problem? Why was Rab Mani saying that there's no kriya after shiva? So the Gemara answers, no, you see the answer very simple. Specifically in the honor of a father and a mother, to express the mourning to a greater extent, over here, the halach is that there's kriya even after shiva. But in a regular case, Rab Mani says, and we pass like Rab Mani, there's no kriya after shiva. Here the Gemara brings the source of Bechlal keeping the days of Shiva, the mourning for the different relatives. So we learned that Kala Oma Beparshas Kayanim, Shekayim Metamalan, all those relatives that are mentioned there in the Psukim regarding a Kayin. A Kayin is not allowed to be Metama himself to a mace. But then there are the relatives that a Kayin is allowed to be Metama himself. So all of those relatives, Aval Misabal Alei, and a Aval is also, that's the Avelus of a Aval, for those relatives. And who are these relatives that are mentioned there? Ve'eluhein Ishtoi, person's wife, Aviv, a father, Ve'imoi, a mother, Achiv, a brother, Achaisa, a sister, and B'nai Yibita, a son or daughter. Those are the 7 relatives that are mentioned there by a Kayin. Haisifu Alein, then they added to this more, Achiv, Va'achaisa, Apsula Me'imoi, that if a person has a brother or a sister that is from a mother, so even though by Kayanim, if it's only a brother or a sister from a mother, they're not allowed to be Metame, but for Avelus they said, even a brother and a sister from a mother, there is Avelus. And a sister that's already married, whether she's a sister from the father or the mother, so over there also a Kayin, once a sister gets married, is not allowed to be Metame, but there is Avelus. And then the Braisa adds even more than this. Just like there's Avelus regarding these individuals here, the 7 people that are mentioned, kach misabel al shniim shalahem. The same thing is also the next generation. So Rashi says, for example, shniim shalahem means just like there's avelus for a father, there's avelus for a grandfather, there's avelus for a son, there's avelus for a grandson, and so on, or even avelus for the son of a sister. So whoever that mentions here avelus, the avelus is also for the next generation. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. This is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rab Shimon ben Elazar argues and says, if there's a situation where you say that there's another generation that there has to be avelus for, it's only a grandson or a grandfather, but not when it comes to a nephew and so on, when it's a son of your sister. The Chachamim say, Kol shemisabel olav, that any time there's avelus for one of these 7 people that we mentioned, and that person that you have to be misabel for, he is sitting avelus, misabel ima. You have to keep the avelus with him. So for example, a father, that you have to keep avelus for a father that passed away. If the father is sitting shiva, you have to keep avelus with him. Which means for a grandfather or a grandson and so on.
Basically shniim.
So exactly. So the Gemara asks the question right away. If so, the Gemara, Chachamim haina tanakam. It seems like the Chachamim is saying the same thing as Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is saying that there's the second generation that you have to sit shiva for, or a grandfather that you have to sit shiva for. It seems like the Chachamim are saying the exact same thing. So the Gemara answers, the difference is imay babayis, whether that is only if that person is with you in the house. Which means that according to Rabbi Akiva, when he said that you have to sit shiva for a grandfather or even for a nephew or a niece, that's even if your sister that's sitting shiva is not with you in the house. Or your brother or your father that's sitting shiva is not with you in the house. You still have to sit shiva for their son or their father that passed away. Whereas according to the Chachamim, only if the one that's sitting shiva is with you in the house, then you have to sit shiva with them. And the Gemara brings a source for this concept. Rav, that is, Rav said to Chiya's son, and Rav Huna said to Rabbe's son, regarding a situation when their wife was sitting shiva. So they said to them, Ba'apa, in her presence, nahoig avelusa, you should behave with avelus. B'loyapa, but not in front of her, leitinig avelusa. You don't have to behave with avelus. So here you see that there's this concept of keeping avelus together with a wife when you're in her presence. Mar Ukve shachavle bar chamua. Mar Ukve, his brother-in-law passed away. The son of his in-laws, his brother-in-law passed away. So what does that mean? His wife was sitting shiva. It's his wife's sister. So he thought that he's going to sit shiva for this, right, and then also shloishim together with his wife. Rav Huna came to visit Mar Ukve. Ashkeche, he saw what he was doing. He was sitting shiva. So Amalei told him, Do you have to eat tzudnaisa? Tzudnaisa is this special meal that they would make for the people that are sitting shiva. It says you have to join and sit shiva for this. Lo amru ela lekavod ishtay. The only reason they said that you sit shiva is for the honor of your wife. And when was this said? Ela chama v'chamaisai. And they only said this if one of your in-laws passes away. So then, for the honor of your wife, in her presence, you sit shiva. But in a case where a brother-in-law passes away, then it wasn't said. Even for the honor of your wife, you don't have to sit shiva. The Tanya, so he brings the sources for this. So he says here, you see there are two braises about this subject. The Tanya, in one braise it says, a person's mother-in-law, father-in-law pass away. So a person should not tell his wife to put on makeup and to make her hair because she's sitting shiva. On the contrary, you should also turn over your bed and behave with avelis together with her. And the same is in the reverse. If a woman, her father-in-law or mother-in-law pass away, so she's not allowed to put her makeup on and do her hair. And she has to also turn over her bed and behave with avelis together with her husband. That's one braise. So we see that a husband and wife should do avelis for one another. The Tanya, but another braise it says, that a person should not tell his wife to put on makeup and do her hair in this time. But nevertheless, the braise continues, the truth was said, she could pour a cup for her husband, and she could prepare his bed for him, and she could wash his hands and feet for him. So what do you see over here? That there is she does not have to keep shiva with him in a time that he's sitting shiva. So kashian, in a time that she's sitting shiva. So the Gemara says kashian adadi. So these two braises are contradiction. Elalav, what's the answer? Shma mino kam b'chama v'chamaisai and kam b'shar krevim. If it's a father-in-law or mother-in-law that passes away, then you have to keep shiva together with your wife, or your wife has to keep shiva together with the husband. And in a case where it's other relatives, so then there's no halacha of a husband keeping shiva with a wife or vice versa. Shma mina, this is a raya to what Mar Ukve told, what Rav Huna that is told Mar Ukve. Tanya nami hachi, we learned this in a brayse clearly as well. Loi amru lekavod ishtay. This that it says that a husband should keep shiva together with his wife in her presence, it wasn't said elo chama v'chamaisa bulvad. That's only if his father-in-law or mother-in-law passed away. Simon B'Taif.